Hello, my name is Richard Einhorn, and I'm going to talk to you about my personal experience with hearing loss. I'll describe what happened to me and some of the ways that I cope with it. I hope you enjoy it. This talk is called Hearing Loss and Hearing Assistance, a Personal Perspective, and I'm going to describe what I've learned about hearing loss from my own particular point of view, and I'm also going to describe how I try to cope with my own particular problems. By way of introduction, I'm a composer, and perhaps my best known piece is a piece for orchestra and chorus called Voices of Light. Voices of Light has been performed all over the world, and it's been also recorded by Anonymous 4 and by the Netherlands Radio Philharmonic. And this is a performance still of a performance, I believe, up in upstate New York. And recently we had performances with the Baltimore Symphony and the London Symphony. It's been done at the Sydney Opera House and everywhere else. As a composer, you learn a lot about audio technology, and of course you're completely interested in how things sound and how to hear better. But I also have a background as a record producer, and I worked for CBS Masterworks for many years. I was the producer of Yo-Yo Ma's first recording of the Bach Suites, among many, many other recordings. I've worked with the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, Glenn Gould, Murray Pariah, and many, many others. As a record producer, you also, of course, are very interested in how things sound, but you also learn a lot about audio technology and about techniques for getting a very, very clear sound. All of this has become very useful to me and very important knowledge for me in approaching how I cope with my own personal problems in hearing. Since I lost most of my hearing in 2010 due to a virus, I had more or less normal hearing, some problems with my left ear. My right ear was very good, but then in 2010 I had some kind of viral infection and developed overnight sudden sensory neural hearing loss and completely lost the use of my right ear. Since that happened, I've become a hearing loss advocate, and I've been featured on the cover of Hearing Loss magazine and wrote an article for them in which I go over many of the points that I'm going to be giving in this talk. And I've also been featured in the New York Times. This particular article is about my use of the iPhone, which I'm going to discuss in this talk. And also another New York Times article is about my advocacy for technology, a wonderful technology called hearing loops. In fact, at a recent performance of Voices of Light, my piece, down in Baltimore, we installed a temporary loop, and the Washington Post covered that as well. So today what I'm going to do is talk about three basic areas. First of all, what is hearing loss, at least what I understand hearing loss to be. Then I'm going to talk about various hearing assistance technologies, ones particularly that I use. There are many, many different kinds of hearing loss. There are many, many different kinds of hearing assistance technologies. I'll be talking about just the specific ones that impact me and impact actually many, many people. And then finally, what I'm going to do is to try to expand the notion of what might be possible for hearing assistance by introducing you to a couple of new pro-audio technologies that have a lot of potential for those of us with hearing problems. So, what is hearing loss? Well, from my standpoint, hearing loss is a misleading term. It's really hearing mangling. Your hearing is, it's not that you merely lose things, it's that your hearing gets distorted. And so hearing damage or impairment is a much more accurate term. There are a lot of misleading terms with hearing loss, and the actual term itself doesn't quite explain how devastating a condition it is. I'm going to describe basically four common problems with hearing that people with hearing loss have: tinnitus, recruitment, the loss of volume and the loss of high sounds, which is what most people think of as hearing loss, and speech and noise. The reason why I put the most common one kind of in the center was to kind of give you a different perspective as to what these problems are. Because in fact, the loss of volume and the loss of high sounds is probably the easiest to treat. Now, this is a slide I really like because visually it gives you a perfect analog of what hearing loss is like. Perfect hearing looks like this, and as you can see, perfect hearing is not perfect. There are little daubs and little problems with everybody's hearing, but impaired hearing really makes the message very difficult to decipher. So that's a very good visual analog of what hearing loss sounds like. So what is hearing loss? These are some specific kinds of hearing loss. The first one I'll discuss is tinnitus, and this is often described as ringing in the ears, and certainly there are many different kinds of tinnitus, but the kind that I have is not really ringing in the ears. It's more like a very high-pitched band of noise that sometimes is in the background and sometimes is very much in the foreground, as it is right now. The loudest sound in the room for me is tinnitus. What does tinnitus sound like? Well, if it's mild, it sounds like this. As you can hear, it's not really that annoying. It's a little bit of a distraction, but it's no big deal. But if you have a moderate level of tinnitus, it can, in fact, begin to be very distracting. Now, you need to imagine that this sound is in your ears 24/7. It doesn't stop simply because you go to sleep. So, if you have, instead of a moderate level, if in fact it's the loudest sound in the room, if it's severe, then, as you can hear, it can be an extremely irritating sound. So irritating, in fact, that some musicians, notably Pete Townsend, who's quite open about this, have had to stop their careers in order to treat it. It's been so severe that some people have had nervous breakdowns and even attempted suicide to escape it. Very little is known about tinnitus, more these days than has been known in the past. There's been some recent breakthroughs in understanding the mechanisms of tinnitus, but it isn't that well known. But even less well known and understood is a problem that's often called recruitment or hyperacusis. This is usually described as the sounds in your ears being extremely loud. But there's more to it than that. It's not only that they are extremely loud, but they are extremely loud and extremely distorted. How distorted? Well, let me give you an example. Oh, how harshly was I repulsed by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing, and yet it was... Okay, those are the words of Ludwig van Beethoven, and he was talking about his own hearing loss. And as you can hear, that's completely normal. But if you have the problem that I'm calling recruitment or hyperacusis, this is what it sounds like. What you need to imagine is this example at extremely loud volume, louder actually than you may even be able to get if you turned up the sound on your computer. Now, that is a very accurate reproduction of what I hear 24/7 in my right ear. I hear sound that distorted even if you were talking at a moderate level of volume. If I'm in a very loud environment, such as a subway or a party, it is so loud and so distorted that it literally can precipitate a panic attack for me. And therefore, what I do whenever I'm in public is wear a very powerful earplug in my right ear. That was the ear that was affected by my hearing loss. Now, the reason why I know that this example is accurate is that while I have a very bad hearing loss in my left ear, my hearing is relatively flat, and there is very little distortion and recruitment or hyperacusis in my left ear. Therefore, since I understand synthesizer technology, and this was simulated on a synthesizer, I can use the synthesizers as a way of simulating what the sound in my right ear is and check it with my actually very accurate left ear. If you don't have severe recruitment, you still nevertheless have problems understanding sound. When you take an audiogram and get your hearing tested, they have a speech comprehension section. This is why your speech comprehension scores might not be completely accurate. Such an infirmity in the one sense which should have been more perfect in me than in others. And even mild versions of recruitment can be very, very annoying. A perfection such as few surely in my profession as you can understand, listening to the world through this kind of a filter that's distorting like this, is annoying and very, very tiring. What we typically think of as hearing loss, what many people do, is simply loss of volume. Typically, a mild hearing loss is described as anything up to 25 dB loss. In this context, you don't really need to know very much about what a dB is. Just think of it as the just noticeable difference between any two volume levels. And then, if 25 dB of hearing loss is considered to be mild, a 40 dB loss is considered to be moderate, and a 70 dB loss of hearing from a nominal 0 is considered to be severe. But what people don't really tell you is that a 25 dB hearing loss, that so-called mild hearing loss, is actually a very, very dramatic difference in the loss of the ability to hear sound. So what I've done is I've made an example in which you will first hear something at a normal volume, then it will go down 25 dB, then it will go down 40 dB, and finally will go down 70 dB. The first volume step that you hear of it going softer, that's a 25 dB loss in volume. Hearing impaired people do not hear some sounds at all. People with a severe or profound hearing loss may not hear any speech sounds unless they are shouted at close range. People with a mild or moderate loss are more likely to hear some sounds and not others. Hearing impaired people also have trouble understanding speech because essential parts of some phonemes are not audible. Okay, as you can hear, 25 dB is really a significant loss, and therefore, once again, I think the terminology that's used to describe hearing loss, hearing problems, is really, really misleading. The way I see it, a loss of 25 dB should be thought of as really, really bad hearing. Minus 40 dB loss should be considered really, really, really bad hearing, and a minus 70 dB loss should be considered, oh my God. I mean, essentially you're deaf. These are really serious problems. Now, this example, though, is not exactly accurate because most of us don't really lose our hearing as a whole. We first start to lose our high frequency, our ability to hear high frequencies, the highs, all the zits, all the high stuff that's in the cymbals or in the high part of the range, in the bird call part of the range. And then gradually, as we get older, we lose more and more highs. So what I've done is I've created an example here, which is basically a time lapse. There's a gradual loss of high frequencies from 20 kilohertz, which is as high as human beings basically can hear, all the way down to 256 hertz, which is essentially middle C on the piano. And this is a time lapse of what it's like to lose your hearing as you get older. Very rough simulation, but it gives you some idea of how speech comprehension goes the more and more you lose your high frequencies. Hearing impaired people miss high frequency information. Because the loudness of speech is dominated by low-frequency components, hearing impaired people may not realize that they are hearing less of the speech signal, even when they cannot understand speech in many circumstances. Statements such as speech is loud enough. Did you hear also that recruitment comes in there? That's completely intentional in my example, because as you start to roll off your ability to hear high sounds, as there's a roll off in your ability to hear high sounds, there's an increase in the amount of recruitment that you hear until finally you hit a critical point where both your inability to hear high frequency and your inability to compensate for distortion that you're hearing creates a situation in which it's very, very, very hard to understand even the simplest sentences. Now, Getting a little bit further into this problem, there's the problem of speech and noise. Speech and noise is the problem, I think, for hearing loss, and that is the ability to discriminate speech from background noise. For many people with hearing loss, understanding speech when it's noisy is the single most frustrating problem. This is a picture of a church, and it gives you an idea of one of the typical places where speech and noise can be a serious problem. Reverberation and echoes mix with the direct sound, and they reduce speech intelligibility. In a church, you get the sound coming directly into your ear from the person speaking, but you also get the sound bouncing off the ceiling, bouncing off the floors, bouncing off the pews, bouncing off the walls, and all of those bounces are also coming into your ears at slightly different times, and they start to create all sorts of serious interactions and reduce your ability to hear sounds, to understand speech. People with normal hearing can filter that noise out because their ears allow them to do that. Their ears have that mechanism. But an impaired ear cannot do it even with a hearing aid. In fact, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. This is an example of which demonstrates speech and reverberation and what the problem really is. You're going to hear me walk back in a reverberant hallway, and gradually you'll hear that my voice not only gets softer, but it starts to get more difficult to understand what I'm saying. And later I will electronically boost the sound, but you'll see that even boosting the volume of the sound does not really improve comprehensibility that much. I am in a reverberant hallway, and I'm about 2 inches away from the microphone. You can hear my voice very clearly. And now what I'm going to do is talk at exactly this volume and walk backwards. As you'll be able to hear, the sound of my voice gradually gets softer and softer. But there's something else going on as well, and that is that the ratio between the reverberations in this hallway and the sound of my voice is changing. There is less distance in terms of volume between my voice and the background reverberations. I'm backing up now, and I'm over 20 feet away, and now I'm backing up and I'm over 30 feet away. And as you can hear, my voice has become very, very soft. It's almost impossible to hear. Now I'm going to electronically boost the sound of my voice up as much as I can. And even though you might be able to hear me, hear the words, it's a very difficult, unpleasant sound because you have to cope with picking out my voice from all background noise. That is what speech and noise is all about. Now I'm coming forward, I'm moving closer and forward. I'm about 15, 20 feet away. I'm now about 12 feet away. I'm now 10 feet away. 6 feet, 4 feet, about a foot, about a half a foot, about 4 inches. And here now, again, my voice is as clear as a bell. So you can see that even boosting the volume really doesn't help that much. It's the speech and reverberation that's difficult. And if you had problems, if you have normal hearing and you have problems understanding what I was saying when it was reverberated and when I was really back in the reverberating space, rest assured that somebody with a serious hearing loss or even a mild, quote-unquote, mild hearing loss is having a lot more problems. Now, what does this mean? It means that if you want to hear well in noise, you simply must get a microphone as close as possible to the desired sound sources. What it also means is that for situations that are noisy, that is like a party or a restaurant, current hearing aid designs won't work very well, given current signal processing techniques, no matter how sophisticated. So, what I'm going to do now is to show you an example of exactly how a hearing aid tries to deal with a noisy situation. If you have normal hearing in a restaurant and have trouble understanding speech at a restaurant, then a person with a serious hearing loss will have a lot more trouble. In this particular example, a friend of mine and I were outside at the Silver Moon Cafe on 105th Street and Broadway in New York City. And I held a microphone up right at ear level where the hearing aid microphones are. And you'll be able to hear her voice. And then gradually, and you won't be able to understand it very well, then gradually what I'm going to do is to move the microphone across the distance between the two of us, over as close as possible to her mouth, and then back again. And you'll hear how the closer you get to my friend's voice, the easier it is for us to understand what she is saying. And the farther away you are, the harder it is to understand, and the harder, and particularly when the microphone is by the ear, it is very, very difficult to pick out. Dana, I have an omnidirectional microphone pointed at you. It's currently at ear level, and what I'd like to ask you to do is to talk a little bit, maybe introduce yourself, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to move it from ear level, which is where a hearing aid tries to hear, and I'm going to move it gradually over to your mouth.
Hi, Richard. Well, my name is Dana, and I grew up with hearing loss myself. My parents started noticing that I wasn't speaking very well by the age of 2.5, so they started taking me to doctors and clinics. And it took about a year to realize that I had hearing loss in both ears. And 2 out of 3 clinics said I also had aphasia. So I was taken to a school for aphasia children in California. And then they found out that I was aphasia.
Okay, as you could hear, at the level of the ear, it is very, very hard to pick out speech. The closer you get the microphone to my friend's mouth, the easier it is for you to understand her. Now, hearing aids have technology that attempts to compensate for that. It's called signal processing, and the modern hearing aids are called digital signal processing. There's nothing very, they're used in a very sophisticated way, but there's nothing very exotic about the actual technology. It's been in the professional audio business for decades. And so what I did was, with my own equipment, which is high-quality professional audio equipment, I simulated in a very, very simple way what a hearing aid tries to do when it is compensating for speech and noise problems. And I took that recording that you heard and I filtered it and compressed it in ways that hearing aids claim that they do. And here is what that recording sounds like. Dana, I have an omnidirectional microphone pointed at you. It's currently at ear level, and what I'd like to ask you to do is to talk a little bit, maybe introduce yourself, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to move it from ear level, which is where a hearing aid tries to hear, and I'm going to move it gradually over to your mouth.
Hi, Richard. Well, my name is Dana, and I grew up with hearing loss myself. My parents started noticing that I wasn't speaking very well by the age of 2.5, so they started taking me to doctors and clinics. And it took about a year to realize that I had hearing loss.
What you can hear is that there's some improvement to comprehensibility by using hearing aid signal processing or hearing aid-like signal processing. We've eliminated a little bit of the lows, we've focused in on the speech perception, speech range, and we've dug out a tiny little bit of it. But as we were listening to that example, you could hear that the amount of improvement is minimal compared to the amount of improvement you get when you simply move a microphone closer to the source that you want to hear. Now, speech and noise, recruitment, tinnitus, loss of volume, all these different problems. What are the consequences? They're enormous. As Helen Keller says, blindness separates us from things, but deafness separates us from people. And there are enormous problems with hearing loss. There are developmental problems for infants, children, and teenagers, impaired memory and the ability to learn new tasks. It's very disorienting to have a hearing loss. Your alertness is reduced, as is your job performance and earning power. You are prone to severe stress and, in fact, panic attacks, as I was discussing earlier. Depression is a side effect of hearing loss, anxiety, anger, and fear. Also, it is very, very difficult to communicate with people, and you feel very, very isolated. You become irritable, and you fail to recognize social cues like jokes, anger, and vocal tone that all of us, those of us with normal hearing, take for granted. There is social rejection that comes with hearing problems, and stigmatization. You're considered both deaf and dumb. And there's extreme exhaustion. It is very tiring to try to hear all day. And at the end of the day, particularly a day with a lot of noisy environments in it, I'm completely wiped out. But then there's something even worse. Hearing loss is linked to dementia. This is brand new research from Johns Hopkins. A mild hearing loss can be linked to brain atrophy in older adults. And new research from Johns Hopkins University has found that seniors with hearing loss are significantly more likely to develop dementia over time. The research documents that the greater the degree of hearing loss, the greater the risk. And how much greater? Specifically, the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease also increased with diminishing hearing, with the authors noting, and this is extremely ominous, that for every 10 dB decrement in hearing, the extra risk increased by 20%. That means that if you have even less than what's considered a mild hearing loss, if you have just a 10 dB rather than a 25 dB hearing loss, your risk of Alzheimer's goes up 20%. Those are very, very ominous statistics indeed. Now, the specific mechanisms that underlie the association are not yet known. They don't know what causes what, or even whether or not hearing loss causes dementia, or dementia is somehow or another implicated in the anatomy, in the biology that causes hearing loss. But they suspect that some of the underlying mechanisms are the cognitive load, the effects of hearing loss on cortical processing, and the social isolation. All of these are non-mutually exclusive, and they probably all go together. They probably all work together to create a serious cognitive decline. So what can be done to prevent dementia and all the other problems associated with hearing loss? Well, the most important thing, of course, is to protect your hearing. The other thing to do is to avoid loud noise environments. A single exposure, prolonged exposure to hearing, sound levels above 85 dB can be very damaging. And the louder the prolonged exposure, the shorter the amount of time needed to create permanent damage. A typical rock concert between 90 and 100 dB will damage your hearing permanently. Yes, your ears might be ringing for only a day or two, but you will still have permanent hearing damage. Your best bet, always in noisy environments, is to learn how to use earplugs and use them. You can find earplugs at the earplug store, and a very wide selection of them, including so-called musicians' earplugs, which don't distort the sound. They just lower the volume into an acceptable level so that you're not being exposed to over 85 dB worth of sound pressure level. Now, what about a cure? Well, at the present time, there is no cure for hearing loss. You lose your hearing, it's gone. But the Hearing Health Foundation has what's called the Hearing Restoration Project, HRP. And this is a very exciting development. This is a page from their website, from the HRP website. Essentially, what the Hearing Health Foundation learned, what the Restoration Project has discovered, is that birds are able to regenerate their hearing. They discovered this quite by accident. And if the birds are able to regenerate their hearing, since we are descended ultimately from, mammals are ultimately descended from birds and similar animals, we may have genetic switches that can be switched on to possibly enable us to regenerate our hearing as well. I'm talking about specifically the inner ear regenerating the cochlea. And in fact, that is what they're doing. There's a 5-year plan to develop research, and then a longer plan to create to transition the research from animal research ultimately to humans. And they're predicting somewhere between 10 and 15 years before it's possible to have a cure for hearing loss. Well, with all of this in mind, while we're waiting for that cure, we need to find ways to hear now. And there are many, many different devices, technological devices that you can use to help you hear better. These are the ones that I use, and I use these virtually every day. I almost certainly use at least one of them every day, if not all of them. The devices that I use are hearing aids, a Bluetooth streamer, personal listening devices, and I use, whenever they're available, and they're good, public assistive technologies. I'll briefly go into each one. Hearing aids are basically what's been called the public address system that you wear. It contains a microphone, amplifier, some filtering circuitry, and a loudspeaker. It also contains a lot of other technology as well, including technology to prevent feedback, because when you put a microphone that close to a loudspeaker, you can get feedback. But they're actually fairly straightforward devices. You plug them into your ear. They're very small. You can change, some of them have program change switches and volume switches on it, like the upper pair does in this particular photograph. They're unobtrusive. They have reasonable but not great sound quality. They're reasonably helpful in many situations, and ideally they could serve as a useful hub for an integrated hearing assistance system. However, they are very expensive. A pair of good hearing aids can easily run you $7,000. They have a poor price-sound quality ratio. If you buy a $7,000 stereo system, you will be buying one of the world's greatest stereo systems. You can't get much better than that if you were prepared to spend that much money. $7,000 spent on hearing aids will get you mediocre sound, and that's at best. They are not high-fidelity devices. They are also not very helpful in many situations, such as the restaurant situation that we discussed before. And for advanced users, at the moment, there is no easy way to program them in any kind of serious detail. I'm technologically savvy. I have a lot of friends with hearing problems who are also technologically savvy. We can't change these devices on the fly when we know that very simple adjustments could dramatically help us in certain situations. Now, in addition to the hearing aid, what I have is what's called a Bluetooth streamer that connects with my specific model of hearing aid. I wear it around my neck. It looks like this picture here. And it enables me, with a smartphone, with an iPhone in my particular case, to take phone calls wirelessly. It will automatically connect my iPhone directly to my hearing aid. I wear the streamer. The phone call comes to my iPhone. The iPhone broadcasts Bluetooth to my streamer. The streamer then uses another technology to get it into my hearing aid. And so without any wires and any hands, I can answer the phone, I can talk on the phone, and I can also use the music programs on my iPhone, and I can also listen to audiobooks. There are some disadvantages to it. It's not cheap. And it also doesn't pair that easily. In other words, the technology is a little cumbersome to use. And if you are uncomfortable and unfamiliar with audio technology and smartphone technology, you will find the use of a Bluetooth streamer not that straightforward, I'm sorry to say. It took me quite a while to learn it, but I do use it every day, and I enjoy using it. Now, I also use what are called personal listening devices or assistive listening devices, ALDs. This is a very typical one. It's called a pocket talker. Very simple. It consists of a microphone, an amplifier, and a pair of headphones that you wear. Now, it's pretty good, but you can also do the same thing with an iPhone. This is my iPhone that's been set up to serve as a pocket talker. Now, using a smartphone for assistive listening, why would you want to do that? Well, There are many good reasons. First of all, it sounds extremely good. If you use it properly, it sounds a lot better than it would if you were using a pocket talker. The electronics in at least an iPhone are very, very high quality, and similarly also in an Android or other smartphones. If you already have one, it's very cheap to set up for hearing assistance. You really don't need to add a microphone to it. So if you buy yourself a good pair of earphones, which will cost you around $70, and you buy a good hearing app, which will cost you $5, you're in business if you already have a smartphone. It's fun to use. It's very, very easy to use. You just plug this stuff in, and if you're familiar with how to use a smartphone, it's a lot of fun to use. And it's a multitasker, not a unitasker. You need to carry only one device with you, your smartphone. You don't need to carry a smartphone plus a pocket talker in order to use it. It's very, very simple. So where can you use an iPhone or a smartphone for hearing assistance? Wherever hearing loops are not available. I've used them at restaurants, at parties, concerts, plays, lectures. I've used them in houses of worship, at synagogues and temples, at dinner parties at homes. I've even watched TV with it. It's an incredibly effective way to hear as well as your ears will allow you to hear. Of course, none of these devices will cure your hearing problems. You will still have your hearing problems, but you will be confronting and coping with your hearing problem in a way that gives your ears the best chance possible to hear as well as they can. Why would you not use a smartphone? You'd probably have to remove your hearing aids. In other words, there's no really good wireless way to get from a smartphone into your hearing aids. What you need to do is to take your hearing aids out and use an earphone. You'll need to be somewhat comfortable with tech. Using an iPhone for hearing assistance is not for people who claim they're technophobic. Another reason that you might not want to use a smartphone is that it's not invisible. In other words, you can see the device. Now, there are many people who don't like anybody to know that they have a hearing problem. If you use a device like the smartphone or a pocket talker, unfortunately, these devices are visible. Now, my personal feeling is the best way to get a hearing loss to become invisible is to simply solve the hearing problem, no matter how you do it. So for me, having a device that's visible, that people can see, is less of an issue than the issue of not being able to hear. And every single place that I've used this technology, every single place I've used it, people immediately forget that I'm using it and it simply enables me to hear and to participate in a conversation as easily as if my hearing were normal. It does require also a smartphone to use, and apparently, according to research that I've read, the iPhone is currently the most suitable technology for using it. If you want to set up an iPhone or a smartphone for hearing loss, there are 4 basic components. You need very high-quality earphones, a smartphone hearing app, a high-quality microphone is optional but very, very useful, and you need to learn how to use it, and you need to practice how to use it. Here are some typical common styles for earphones. You probably have seen these Apple earbuds. Toss them. They sound terrible. They are unreliable. The quality control on them is terrible. Toss them. You need to spend about $80 for earphones. Here are some typical styles. These are over the ears. These are good, but they're not great. This is a different kind of over-the-ear style. Again, they're a little bit of overkill. You don't really need anything like this. And this particular style, where the pads rest against the ear, don't isolate the sound very well. You really need to close your ears off in some way. Noise-canceling headphones can be very useful, but again, they're large and they're cumbersome to carry around. These are very tiny. These are in-ear earphones, and they are very, very useful, and they're the ones that I recommend. They completely seal the ear off so that you're only hearing sound through the device, which is very important. And they're very, very comfortable to wear. They cost around $100, and they sound fantastic. You can also get an option where they can make custom ear molds if you have particularly unusually shaped ears that are very comfortable to wear. And in fact, I wear in-ear earphones sometimes all day. And you have different ear tip styles if you prefer. And here are some custom made ones. These are very expensive ones, by the way. And these are the particular ones that I'm using these days, Shure SC535s. Instead of earphones with a wire, though, you might want to ask, can you use a neck loop or Bluetooth? And the short answer is no, not really. The reason is that Bluetooth technology, to talk about that for a second, just simply will not, has too much delay. In other words, somebody will speak and it will take you sometimes up to 30 seconds before you actually hear the person's voice in your earphones or hearing aid. As for neck loops, which some people have suggested instead of earphones, in many environments they have hum. How bad is the hum? It's this bad. In other words, it can be so loud that if you don't know the environment that you're in, you can't depend upon using neck loops. That's why I suggest using earphones only. Smartphone hearing apps, as I mentioned, are very cheap. They're usually around $5. They usually should have a limiter in them. Look for a limiter, a compressor, equalization, which is filtering, and a noise gate. Most of them don't have all these, but some of them are pretty darn good. This is one of the ones that I suggest, ears. Again, it's for the iPhone. There are very few, unfortunately, for the Android at this time that I'm aware of at this time. But this one is very good for the iPhone. It's got a very nice and simple and intuitive interface that allows you to move from a warm setting to a bright setting if you need to hear better. This is another $5 app. It's got volume and it's got all sorts of cool other features, including filtering and a zoom, which allows you to focus directly in on somebody's voice when they're speaking. And then this is another one which has cute graphics and is pretty good, but I prefer, I think, the other ones to it. I also use professional recording software. This is called Fire 2. It costs around, I think it costs around $10, and it allows you to make very high quality recordings at the same time that you're listening. And it has wonderful signal processing by a company called Isotope that makes professional audio repair software and professional mastering software. So there are two kinds of microphones that can be useful for hearing assistance. I mean, there are more, but these are the two basic kinds. If you have a smartphone, chances are there's an omnidirectional microphone built into your smartphone. The new Apple iPhone 5, I believe, will actually have 3 microphones built in. These microphones typically are omnidirectional, but you can also optionally add a directional microphone to it or a cardioid microphone. An omnidirectional microphone picks up everything. It picks up the sound all around it. And it's very useful, but if you are using it for hearing assistance, you might consider getting an attachment for your smartphone that gives you somewhat of some directionality. This is called a cardioid or directional microphone. Cardioid means heart and heart-shaped, and if you flip the pattern over, you can see that it looks like a heart. These two microphones are very useful, but the bottom line is this. After a lot of experimentation, I found that for restaurants, concert plays, or parties, a cardioid is much better than an omni. A directional microphone is better. So there are 2 currently available choices for the iPhone 4S, and an adapter should make them compatible with the brand new iPhone 5. This is the $80 Tascam IM2, which just clips onto the power port of your iPhone, or and this is an example of how it's actually used. Or there's an Apogee mic which costs $200, which gives you studio quality recordings, and this attaches by a cable either to your iPhone or to your iPad. These are compatible only with the iPhone 4S. They may be compatible with the iPhone 5 with an adapter. I haven't been able to check that out. So basically, this is the iPhone in action. You've got the cardioid directional microphone attached to the power port. You've got very, very good earphones, and you've got a $5 hearing app. And with this rig, I can hear just about anywhere where a hearing aid is not providing me adequate sound. Here's a close-up of it. Okay, there are other listening devices that I'm going to just quickly walk you through. There's FM, which is basically a wireless pocket talker. You give somebody a microphone to wear, and you wear a receiver with an earphone. And then there's one particular one that's very exciting called the Etymotic Companion Mics. It's been discontinued, but you can sometimes find it on eBay. It's much cheaper than the typical FM system. And the exciting thing about it is that you can give up to 3 people these microphones to wear, and you wear a receiver. So 4 people can actually have a very, very high-quality sound conversation. The 3 people to the right are wearing the microphones. The gentleman on the left is wearing an earphone and a receiver, and he can hear those people as well as his ears will allow. This is the ideal way to hear a gathering of 4 people. I use the companion mics almost every single time that I go to a restaurant that my wife and I go to a restaurant with another couple. Now, there are 2 most common, now for public hearing assistants like theaters and concerts, there are 2 common technologies, infrared and FM. They are widely available, but I don't like them very much, I have to be honest with you. The problem with infrared is that with infrared technology, and that's a very typical receiver, when you break the line of sight, they work with a beam, with an infrared beam. When you break the line of sight, a very loud burst of noise is emitted, and that can be very, very dangerous to whatever amount of hearing you have left. They're also very uncomfortable to wear. These devices are not comfortable to wear. They leak sound out of the earpieces themselves are poorly designed, and they leak sound out, and my wife is constantly disturbed whenever I'm wearing these things at a movie or at the theater. And they require handing over a driver's license or some other way of some other thing. And once I drove 200 miles before I remembered that I had left, that I had handed over my driver's license. I had driven 200 miles without a driver's license because I had forgotten to pick it up. They're widely available, but very, very few people actually use them. FM is a little bit better in terms of sound quality. You don't get those interruptions. But if you want to purchase your own FM receiver, it's almost impossible to guarantee that your FM receiver will work with a particular venue's sound installation. They're very uncomfortable, just like to wear, just like many of them are, just like the infrared. They also have those poorly designed earphones, and they require handing over a driver's license. Again, widely available, very, very used, not that often. Why? Well, you don't look you look unusual wearing them. Here I am at a concert, not at a concert, at a movie theater. I'm wearing them. I'm wearing one of these devices. They're uncomfortable to wear, and it's very obvious that when you wear them, you have a hearing problem. You are broadcasting your hearing problem. And even though the film that I was at was skewed towards a wider, an older audience, I checked. And I was the only person who requested an assistive listening device for that show. And I checked with them, and that is very typical. Very few people actually use this technology, unfortunately, despite the fact that they need this technology in order to understand the films, the theater, and the concerts they go to. People either stay away or they simply go for the social reasons they can't actually enjoy the show. So they're rarely, if ever, used. They're undignified. They're cumbersome. Infrared can be dangerous if it's not properly adjusted. Both of them are unsuitable for many situations. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to hear at your drugstore or at a taxi? And finally, Bluetooth itself, which many people are saying is a technology, maybe in the future it will be modified so that it can be useful, but at the moment it really is not useful for many situations where we need to hear. And that brings me to hearing loops. Hearing loops is a technology that I advocate for. And I'm going to very, very briefly explain what hearing loops are, where they can be used, and advantages over the other wireless hearing systems. So, what are hearing loops? Think dignity. Think flexibility. They're a dignified, flexible solution for people with hearing loss, especially people who have the proper hearing aids. But you don't necessarily need those hearing aids in order to use hearing loops. It is a very simple technology that transmits sound wirelessly to loop-compatible hearing aids. All you need to do is flip a switch on your aid to hear the sound if you have the proper kind of hearing aid. And that means no ugly, bad-sounding earphones. So this is a typical loop receiver or loop amplifier. The sound goes in there. It can be a TV, it can be a stereo, it can be the soundtrack to a film, whatever. It can be a microphone. You just put the sound in there. And then here is where, this is where the loop of wire is connected. What is the loop? It's just standard old wire, the kind that you buy at Radio Shack. It can be that inexpensive. It is a very, very simple technology. And then basically, the next thing that you need is a loop-compatible hearing aid, which means that it has something called a T-coil in it. You simply press the switch on a hearing loop-capable hearing aid, and you switch it to the T-coil program, and you can hear whatever the loop is providing. You stand inside the loop. You just press that little switch there. This is a T-coil. It's a very, very simple copper wire that's been wrapped around a common, just a spool basically of wire. Very, very small, very inexpensive. Most hearing aids available are T-coil capable. You just simply ask your audiologist to put it in there and turn it on. Okay, this is a simple installation. The loop receiver, the loop amplifier is connected to the TV audio. Then the loop of wire is run around the area in which you want to hear. You sit inside that. You flip your T-coil to you flip your hearing aid to T-coil, and you can hear the sound as well as your ears will permit you. There is no more direct way to hear the sound than this, and no cheaper way or simpler way to set up high-quality hearing TV sound. This is a typical kit that's used to create a simpler version of that TV loop. You just simply take the mat that all the other equipment is resting on here, put it under your chair, you sit on the chair, hook the loop driver up to the TV set, and you can hear as well as your ears will allow you to. This is typical setup for a talk, and this just demonstrates how powerful the electromagnetic field is within the loop, where all the yellow and the white areas are. And also the height of it. The height of the loops of the electromagnetic field that the loop generates can be adjusted so that you can either stand there and hear very well or sit and hear very well. More elaborate setups require more elaborate looping systems. This is a common quote-unquote phased array loop design, which professional loop installers would install, say, in a theater. Now, where can hearing loops be used? By the way, this is the common symbol for loop installations, the ear with a line through it and a T. Well, I just made this little video, which should give you a good idea. Live recording at the subway booth at 66th Street, Lincoln Center, asking for directions.
Take the 1 train to 14th Street, get off and get the L train to Bedford. That's heading south. Excuse me?
The exact same encounter as heard over the loop system installed at the subway booth at 66th Street, Lincoln Center.
Take the 1 train to 14th Street, get off and get the L train to Bedford. That's heading towards Brooklyn. Yes. Excuse me?
So that gives you a very dramatic example of how powerful loops can be and how they can be used to clean up the sound in a very, very, very noisy environment. What I love about that example is that the person who I was asking directions from, I could hear her, but she couldn't hear me that well. She had to say, "Excuse me," because she couldn't hear me. But I could hear her quite well because I was using a hearing aid with a T-coil. Okay, where else can they be used? In airports, in elevators, at the library. In Britain, they're used quite a bit all over the place. Here they are at a point of sale at a museum. Here they are in a taxi cab. The Westminster Abbey was looped for the royal wedding. Here they are at a pharmacy, and at a deli. At a post office, at a bank, in buses. Here I am with Marin Alsop rehearsing at a rehearsal of one of my pieces in London in November at the Barbican. They had a hearing loop installed in the theater. So in order to hear it properly at rehearsal, I asked them to turn the system on, and I could hear incredibly well. You can also use them in enormously large venues. There's a hearing loop installed all over the Michigan State University's Breslin Center. 12,000 out of the 14,000 plus seats have been looped. So bottom line, there are many, many advantages to loops. They're the most flexible technology. They're the most dignified wireless assistive listening system for public spaces. They work extremely well with hearing aids, but don't require hearing aids. You can get loop receivers and earphones if you don't have it, similar to the infrared and FM devices that are currently available. A majority of hearing aids, however, are hearing loop compatible already. They just need to be set up, and it costs pennies to make them, to set them up. Hearing loops can be used in numerous situations where no other assistive technology will work, significantly increasing the quality of life for millions of people. Some 36 million people plus have hearing loss in this country alone. Sophisticated loop designs can enable privacy, secure transmissions, consistent signal strength, and considerable flexibility. And loop systems, unlike FM and infrared, are really used by people with hearing loss. There are many churches in Michigan, for example, that have hearing loops, and they know that they're being used because whenever they turn the system off, they are flooded with complaints from their congregation. Now, there are some issues connected with hearing loops. More qualified installers need to be trained. There needs to be some sort of official qualification and certification. There's the beginnings of that, but there isn't as much as there should be. For home installs and dining tables and living rooms, we need high-quality turnkey systems that include not only the loop, but all the other technology you need, the microphones, the mixers, and signal processing. Very little work has been done in making these, in applying best practices for audio to these home systems. Very, very important, education. More people need to be educated about the importance of loops, their simplicity, and their flexibility. T-coil technology needs to be improved. It can be simplified and it can be made more flexible. But by far, the most important problem that loops have is there just aren't enough of them installed. And that is why a lot of my advocacy focuses on loops. Eventually, of course, like every other technology, loops will be superseded by something else, perhaps a modified Bluetooth technology. But at the moment, the most flexible, the most dignified public assistance technology is hearing loops. Now, there are these new audio technologies that are available, none of which are used in hearing assistance. I don't have much time to go into it, but I did want to let you know about a couple that could be extremely useful. Remember that problem that I showed you, the speech and noise, and particularly the speech and reverberation in the reverberant hallway? Well, it turns out that just recently algorithms have come on the market which can remove reverberation from a recording. Eventually, they might be able to do it live. Let me show you an example.
This is the test sound for the innovative Dereverberation plugin. Is this voice reverberant?
It sure is. But now you use this Dereverberator and listen.
This is the test sound for the innovative Dereverberation plugin. Is this voice reverberant?
The use of this technology for hearing assistance can't be overemphasized. It is extraordinarily exciting technology. It's in its infancy, but eventually it'll be used. But here's another technology that's used. It's so-called spectral repair technology, audio repair technology. What you're going to see is quite extraordinary. You're going to see, removed from a recording, some almost intractable noises. Noises that, this is the kind of technology that sent chills up and down me when I first came across it, because I thought it was science fiction, but it's real, and it's very inexpensive, and eventually what you're about to see will be available for those of us with hearing problems. Okay, we've gone through a lot, and there's a lot that I've discussed. But if nothing else, please remember this. Hiding your hearing loss is so 20th century, and we live in the 21st. There is nothing whatsoever to be gained from hiding your hearing problems. Everybody, if you have a serious hearing problem, everybody around you knows that you do. Trust me. The best way to hide your hearing problem is to conquer it, if you possibly can, is to hear as well as you can in any given situation. If that requires wearing earphones and using a microphone, so be it. Your hearing loss will disappear because you will be able to participate in the conversation in ways that you won't be if you try to fake it or just sit there not hearing and not understanding. No, we can't cure hearing loss yet. That's what the Hearing Restoration Project is all about, and that's what the exciting potential of that project is all about. Until then, however, we can hear better if we are proactive and use the technologies that are available for best practices. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching this presentation. I hope it was helpful to you. If you'd like more information about hearing loss or would like to contact me, please go to the Hearing Health Foundation website, hearinghealthfoundation.org.